Hello, good morning or evening, wherever you are. I'm going to give people a couple of seconds to start rolling in, whoever's available. Today, I'm going to be chatting about second plane rudeness. By second plane, I mean children ages 6 to 12, if you're not familiar with that terminology. And that is an age where a lot of new personality traits start popping up for children, things that you as a parent had never seen before. Your child will go from being a sweet and, for the most part, respectful and helpful little person to suddenly being sassy, outspoken, brash, talks without thinking, really opinionated. And sometimes parents will see that, the children don't want to help anymore, or there's this kind of, you're not the boss of me, or what's in it for me kind of attitude. So that's what a lot of people would consider second plane rudeness, right? These new behaviors. So I want to chat about them today. And I see that a few people are rolling in. So thank you so much for joining me. I know that Fridays can be kind of a weird time, but this is when my husband takes the kids for a little bit. And so I have some time to share with you. So let's jump in. So what I wanted to do today was go over the sensitivities or sensitive periods of the second plane. So these characteristics that come out during the ages of 6 to 12 that can really play a big part in how your child behaves and how you perceive your child, because these are things that are driving your child in their development. Now, the thing about sensitive periods is that they can be really unbalanced. And what do I mean by that? So if you think about your baby, right? You've got like a 7-month-old baby, and they're being driven to crawl and get an object. So they have that drive inside of them, but they don't necessarily have the ability yet to crawl to get that object. And so their drive and their maturity don't always align. And so there's a lot of frustration, right? The same you can think about a 2.5-year-old who wants to get dressed on their own. They have this drive towards functional independence, but the maturity, the ability to do it is not always there. And so that could lead to a lot of frustration, a lot of headbutting. Okay, so take those examples and transpose them into the second plane. Your child has certain drives, but they don't have the corresponding maturity. And so what nature does is it pushes your child to have these experiences, to listen to these drives. And through these experiences and through, sometimes the bad judgment that comes with these drives, your child develops good judgment, right? It develops the ability to have these skills. And so what we're seeing when we're seeing rudeness a lot of time is this imbalance between the drive to develop a particular skill or a particular character trait and the lack of maturity, right? And so we have to give them the experiences and help them work through it in order for them to develop the skills and develop that maturity. So the first sensitivity, and the reason I call them sensitivities and not sensitive periods is because a period is a finite window of time, right? For example, in the first plane, the sensitive period for order doesn't go from 0 to 6. It goes from, I think like 2 to, or like 1.5 to, 4 or 5, something like that. So those are like little windows of opportunity within. Okay. Those are little windows of opportunity within the sensitive period. In elementary, these sensitivities go from 6 to 12. So there's no like smaller windows of opportunity. It's the whole plane. And so they call them sensitivities. Okay. Now that I've got all of that theory out of the way, The first sensitivity is culture or knowledge, right? Your child wants to learn everything about the world. And then we are going to tie that in with intellectual independence. So they want to learn about the world, but they want to do it on their own terms. They don't want you to tell them how things are done. They want to do it on their own. And so how can this come across as rude? Well, your child will maybe say that they know everything, right? So anytime you try to teach them something, it's like, oh, I already know that. And so that can be really shocking as a parent if you don't know where this is coming from. Your child might also ask questions, but then not be satisfied with the answers. And so that, again, as a parent, right, you're used to kind of being the go-to, and now all of a sudden your child's like, oh, I have this question, but I don't really want the answer from you. Or when you give me the answer, I don't really believe you. I want to go elsewhere and find the answer. Again, that's that drive towards knowledge, but the desire to get that knowledge on your own because that child is going towards intellectual independence. Sometimes you'll see children that make or state facts that are inaccurate, right? And so they're kind of the little know-it-alls that are totally inaccurate, but they think that they're right, and they get really angry if you correct them. And so there can be a lot of butting heads there if personalities are very similar, and that, you've got a child that wants to prove that they know everything, and you have a parent that is really focused on being right and can be concerned if they think that their child is going to live the rest of their lives with this mistaken fact in their heads. And so then there's anxiety on the part of the parent, and it becomes, a moment of headbutting. And then lastly, a couple of other things that come up in this combination of wanting to know and learn about the world, but also wanting to do it on your own, wanting to do it independently. Your child might ask questions, but then they don't want to research the answers. So they'll ask you questions, and then when you say, oh, that's a great question, let's go research it, they'll say, no, I don't want to know. I don't want to know anymore. And again, that's their desire to learn on their own. And so that's where, sometimes strewing comes in, which is, leaving books, leaving activities, around the house, or the classroom if you're a guide, that will allow the child to make their own connections and answer these questions without you being the person answering for them. And then lastly, some children, especially younger children in the younger elementary years, can be what is perceived to be mean to animals. So they might want to kill an animal to see what's inside, or they might want to cut a lizard's tail to see what happens. And people might think, well, my child is disrespecting animals. This is horrible. But the reality is that these children are curious. They want to know what happens if. They want to understand how the world works. And so it's our job to channel that curiosity in a way that doesn't that doesn't hurt animals, and help the children to develop empathy and understand that there are ways of exploring this knowledge, this curiosity, without harming animals. So that is, and I'm going a little quickly because I don't have a lot of time, but that in a nutshell is how you can deal with some of the issues that come up around your child wanting to understand and learn about the world, but wanting to do it independently of you. Okay. And what I would recommend in general in this area is to let go of your desire to be right. Let go of your desire to be the teacher, okay? And instead, ask guided questions, right? Say, what made you think of that question? Or where do you think you might find the answer? Or what are your thoughts? What do you already know about this? And, how could you explore this? How could you find out more? And so always directing it back to your child, as opposed to saying, oh, I know a lot about this. Let me share this with you. I also would discourage you from using Alexa. You could just, bark out, hey, Alexa, blah, blah, what's the answer to this? But that's not really encouraging that drive to search for knowledge and to search for it independently, right? That's just transferring dependence from a parent to a machine. And so what we really want to encourage is strewing activities and becoming kind of an observer, knowing that your child is going through this and knowing that it's not really important whether they know right away the right answer to every single question. What's more important is that those questions marinate, and that if and when they do find the answers, that the child feels that they discovered it, because that's how they're really going to hold on to that knowledge and want to find out more. So we're going to be putting our ego aside a little bit, just like we were chatting about last week. Let's put our ego aside. Okay, now let's go to the next sensitivity in the second plane, which is the sensitivity for abstraction. So what does that mean? So that your child is going to be wanting to move away from using the materials, right? They'll use the material to understand the concept, but then eventually their brain will be going faster than their hand, faster than the material, and they'll want to move away from using the materials. And this is not just in terms of math. This happens in every area of knowledge. And so you will want to support that and not get hung up on the fact that you spent $50 on that material and now they have to use it, for the next 3 months, even if they're ready to move away from it, because that's where the headbutting can come in. I also want to mention, just because they let go of one material, it doesn't mean that they're not going to touch any other materials. You obviously, your job is to kind of connect them with the next level so that they continue to understand concepts with their hands, but at the same time respecting the fact that they might want to move faster. So let's think about some of the challenges that might come up in terms of rudeness with this concept of abstraction. So first of all, obviously your child might not want to use the material that you suggest. So they have a question, what's 54 plus 27? And you're like, oh, let's take out the stamp game. And they said, no, I don't want the stamp game. So what do you do then, right? So again, just broaden your question and say, I wonder if there's a material that you might use to help you find that answer, or what are some different ways that you might figure out that answer? You could also just say, let me know if you need help figuring that out. And if it's really important to the child, for example, if they're saving up for something and they really want to figure out the answer to it, they will find a way. And they might come to you or they might go to a material, but they will find a way. Now, something else that you might see is a child who doesn't want to copy. So, quick example, I had, back when I was a teacher, I had a junior teacher, and there was a little boy who was doing a grammar box. And the junior teacher had said, okay, when you're done with the grammar box, I want to invite you to copy, 5 of the little card combinations. I think it was adjective. 5 of the adjective noun combinations from the grammar box. That can be your follow-up work. And so then the little boy came back later, and when he turned in his work, my junior teacher was really frustrated. She said, look, he wrote down a bunch of adjective noun combinations, but they weren't the ones in the card. He made them up on his own. And so that's a really great example of how children will abstract in areas such as language, where they will no longer want to copy, right? They will want to come up with their own things. And you want to encourage this, right? You don't want them to just copy. You want them to think on their own. It goes back to the intellectual independence. So this is something that parents who might have this idea of like, okay, I want you to copy this, and then their child doesn't, and then parent gets frustrated, when the contrary, right? You should be celebrating. So another thing that might happen is, a child has several problems, and they start working on them without materials, and they make mistakes, right? And so our job as parents is not to say, oh, you made a mistake, now you have to fix it, but it's to help them identify the mistakes and fix them on their own, and give them different tools and options for fixing them. So if your child is making mistakes but doesn't want to touch the materials, what can you do? you can, first of all, you need to know how your child can check their own work. Okay. And you need to kind of see what your child is doing wrong so that you can point them in the right direction, and help them become aware of the mistakes that they're making without telling them you made a mistake, because that's a blow to their delicate ego. And so that's the beauty of Montessori, is that it allows the child to check their own work, and it keeps the relationship between the parent and the adult and the child intact. So, you will want to guide them towards checking their own work. Something that you could do is suggest, okay, do the problem just on paper, and then how about if you check it with the material? Use the material as a calculator. Give your child different options so they can choose what works for them, within holding the boundaries that, obviously, for example, if they're doing math, the answer matters. It's not just putting random numbers down. Okay, now something else that happens in terms of abstraction, in order to reach abstraction, children need to repeat, right? They need to practice, they need to repeat. But elementary children, unlike primary children, elementary children do not like repetition, right? They only like repetition if it's sneaky, if we can sneak it in, if we can do it with variety, if we can do a bunch of different ways of exploring that one same concept. And so again, that becomes your job. There's not just one way of doing, addition with 4 digits. There are several different ways, and your job is to put your ego aside. And if the first 3 different ways of doing it didn't work, find a 4th way. Bring real life into it, play games with your child, so that they can reach that abstraction that they're being driven towards, but through repetition, so that it can be really solid in their minds. And then the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of abstraction is messiness. Okay. So you might be wondering, what does the messiness of the second plane have to do with abstraction? So second plane children are focused on the goal, right? And that is a way of abstracting, right? They are seeing in their minds the finished picture. And they're not necessarily focused on keeping everything tidy and crossing, checking off boxes along the way. So, as an adult, your job is to kind of control the environment so that you don't have to control the children. Your job is to talk to your child and help them see why being a little bit more organized would be helpful. Your job is to help them break down these big ideas into manageable tasks, so that then they can be independent in reaching their goals. And so that is a way of supporting abstraction. And again, don't think that if your child is messy between the ages of 6 and 12, that they're going to be messy their whole lives. This can be a pitfall that a lot of parents fall into. So don't think that it will evolve. Your child will evolve. This is something that they're going through. It's developmental. And if they are messy, it's not the end of the world, right? There are a lot of very brilliant, very messy people in the world. So just help your child develop the tools and skills that they need to manage their messiness and to reach their goals. Okay, so the last sensitivity, so there are 4. So just to review, one is culture and knowledge, the other is intellectual independence, the third is abstraction, and the 4th is morality. So the last one is a big player in terms of what could be called misbehavior or rudeness, right? Because children in the second plane, they have this drive towards figuring out, right and wrong, good versus evil, but they're still learning how to be empathetic. They're still learning how to put themselves in other people's shoes and how to see things from somebody else's perspective. And so at first, it's all about them, right? There's a lot of like, this isn't fair, but this isn't fair from my perspective as the child. They're not really looking at the other people. And so they can get really angry and really frustrated when things aren't fair from their perspective. And it's the adult's job to kind of walk them through it and little by little have empathy for them so that they can understand what it feels like to be someone who is relating to an empathetic person. I hope that makes sense. So if you model empathy, eventually they will have empathy for others. Now, another big issue that comes out during this time is tattling, right? So, when second plane children tattle, when they say, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, what they are telling you is, I want to understand if what they did is morally right or wrong. I want to understand if that is within the boundaries of what is acceptable in this little community, be it the family or the homeschool group or the classroom. And so don't look at tattling as a misbehavior. Look at it as a way of them developing their moral compass, and let them know, like, oh, you noticed that she was doing this, and you're probably wondering if that's okay or not. Let's talk about it. And then you go into a little bit more description. So children always want to feel seen and heard first, and then they are willing to be receptive to your feedback. So in all of these circumstances that I'm telling you, the reason why I want you to understand where your child is coming from is because once they are seen and heard, once you know where they're coming from and you say, oh, you really want to learn this, but you want to learn it on your own. Come, let me help you to figure this out on your own. Here are a bunch of different ways that you can do this. So you see how if you first understand where your child is coming from, then you are so much more capable of reflecting back to them and then allowing them to solve their problems and to unpack those big emotions that they have inside. So let's go back to morality. There's a couple more points that I want to touch upon. Like I said, a lot of second plane children lack empathy and compassion. It takes them a while to put themselves in other people's shoes. And so what can we do about this? Well, we can show the child the best of themselves. And so let's say, Johnny took Mary's pencil without asking and Mary's really frustrated. And so you're talking to Johnny. So instead of saying, how would you feel if Mary took your pencil? Because, Johnny's going to get defensive. He might not say, well, I would feel really sad. He might say like, well, I'll be fine with it. Like, I don't really care. I'll just get another pencil, right? That's that second plane rudeness, right? They're protecting themselves. But if you say, I know that you are a person who values your belongings, and I bet that you would have been really frustrated if somebody took your pencil. And I think Mary's also a person who values her belongings, and it looks like she's frustrated as well. So how can we solve the situation? How can we help you and her both have what you need in this case? And so you see how you are first seeing the best in that child and letting them know that you see the best in them. And then helping them to see the best in that other person. And when you see the best in the child that is being hurtful first, it allows them to not be defensive and to really understand their role and to take action to solve the situation. And this is not something that you're going to be able to do all the time because these behaviors trigger us. But the more you can understand the children and the more that you can practice this way of speaking to them, the easier it gets and the more that you can diffuse and shift these, what we can call negative behaviors. Okay, so the last thing in terms of morality is that, and this is a really big one, a child who feels that they were wronged based on their perception of what is right and wrong might behave in a way that is vengeful. And it can be really tricky to figure this out, right? And so you have to really kind of go back to the root of the situation and find out what triggered the entire situation, all of the behavior, and then see if it stems from vengeance due to the fact that they perceive that they were wronged, right? So children who are wronged, people in general who feel wronged, will then hurt others as they were hurt themselves. And you might not perceive that they were hurt, but they are perceived. And so what this brings me to is the 4 needs that every human being has. And with children, it can be really tricky because they don't know they have these needs, and the way that they behave can really vary based on which need is being met or not being met. And I want to add here, before I jump into this really quickly, that I have a mini course on my website on mainlymontessori.com. It's a really affordable 30-minute mini course that will help you to identify which of these needs are not being met by your child or are not being met in your child's life, and how to identify them, how to meet them. And as you're able to meet them in ways that are supportive of your boundaries, but are also supportive of their needs, then a lot of these behaviors will go away. And so, it really, the way that your child behaves depends on which of these needs are not being met. So there are 4 main needs. One is to feel powerful, another is to feel important, another is to feel safe, and the last one's to feel capable. So when your child thinks that the only way that they matter is if they are powerful, if they have power, then they will behave in ways where they seek out power. And it's not always in positive ways or ways that we perceive as positive, right? And we might not understand what's going on. Now, in terms of feeling important, if your child feels that the only way that they matter is if they're getting your attention, then they're going to be driving you nuts. For example, this is the kind of child that will ask a million questions and not necessarily want the answers, but just keep you constantly on your toes because they're always asking questions, and they might drive you crazy because they don't want to hear the answer, and you might perceive that as rude. But that is a child who feels valued only when you are paying attention to them. And so their need for feeling important only is met when you're paying attention to them. So you can see how there's kind of a negative cycle that happens there. The third one is, we were talking about vengeance. When your child does not feel safe, when they think that they have been wronged, they will go and they will hurt someone else because they were hurt. And so some of these behaviors might stem from that, like we just talked about. And lastly, if your child does not feel capable, if your child assumes that they are inadequate, that they are not capable of doing things, then a lot of rude behaviors come about because of this misperception. They don't want to work. They push away every attempt on your part to connect with them because they're convinced that they are just incapable and that nothing that they can do is good enough. And so this is a whole chapter that we dive into in the hub, or that you can also dive into in the mini course. So this mini course is included in the hub membership, or you can get it independently, but it's hugely helpful. I remember when I learned about it, this is from Positive Discipline, and when I learned about it, I started seeing children in a totally different light. I started seeing human beings in general in a different light, and so it helps as well in all of your relationships. But it really shifts knowing where your child is coming from in terms of needs, and knowing where your child is coming from in terms of sensitivities between the ages of 6 and 12. Those two things combined are just huge tools that will allow you to heal your relationship, will allow you to help them meet their needs. And as their needs are met, their development is supported. And as their development is supported, they become more and more mature. And like Dr. Montessori wrote, children are no longer exhibit that rudeness. And I'm paraphrasing here, but they no longer exhibit that rudeness once they have the maturity that comes from being successful in going through these sensitivities. So I'm going to leave you with that. I know that several people put questions And I will dive into those questions in a couple of days. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to have some time to go into those questions, because most of the questions that people posted are more kind of like parenting related questions. And today I wanted to focus more on the kind of homeschooling aspect in terms of sensitivities. So I will jump into those questions hopefully on Saturday. And if not, then I promise next week to do another live. So thank you for sending those questions in. They're very valuable. I want you to know that you're not alone. This is a big struggle for all of us as we navigate this whole new world with this totally different child. Like Dr. Montessori said, it's a metamorphosis, right? It's a completely different child. So we have to approach this child with a completely new set of tools. And that's what I want to share with you. I hope this was helpful. Look for the best in your child, understand where they're coming from, be kind to yourself, give yourself grace, and everything will work out. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.